Let's get you straight to Beijing with MS Now White House reporter Laura Barón-Lopez, who is traveling with the president. Also with us, MS Now senior national security reporter David Rohde here in New York with me, NPR national security correspondent Greg Myrie in Washington, and retired Army Colonel Peter Mansour joins us as well. Laura, what are the president's top priorities for this summit?
Well, Ariel, this summit looks very different than it was initially meant to look, different than the White House wanted it to look, and different than they had pictured it, 6 weeks ago. And initially, they postponed it because of the Iran war. And so when it comes to the priorities, look, we can expect billions of dollars in business deals when it comes to the sale of American soybeans to China, as well as the American sale of Boeing airplanes and parts to China. That's what's expected. But ultimately, Iran is going to loom large over this, and it definitely changes the summit, because even though the president on his way here said that he doesn't think that the U.S. needs China's help in negotiating with Iran and getting the Strait of Hormuz open, he also has said that it is going to be a key part of the talks, and has said he's going to have a, quote, long talk with President Xi Jinping about Iran. This could provide some leverage to China because, of course, they are partners with Iran. They make arms sales to Iran. They also have an interest, though, in seeing the Strait of Hormuz open because of the fact that more than 30% of their oil transits the strait. So, again, even though the president is looking for some deliverables on business deals here, that's things that he can hang his hat on, Iran is going to be a massive part of this summit. Ariel.
So said slightly a different way than Laura there, David. Before this war, roughly 80% of Iran's oil exports were going to China. Now you've got the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. So intuitively, you would think this is in China's interest to help the president wind this down, or at least open the Strait of Hormuz. What is China thinking at this point?
China is our rival, and that's how President Trump needs to come at these talks. And so China wants to see the United States weakened over time. It has an interest in opening the Strait of Hormuz so it can get the oil that you and Laura were talking about, but it wants Trump to fail in this war. China's message for decades has been American wars of regime change, that it opposes them, partly because it's not a democracy and it wants its own regime to survive. So it wants, I think, a resolution of the war that makes Trump look weak, that hurts the U.S., but leaves this regime in power and around. So I don't think Xi is going to do that much to help Trump in the short term. And most of all, President Trump's decision to go into this war, many people said, I just want to repeat it again, has put him in a disastrous position. It's hard to imagine the combination of factors here. High inflation numbers, the Strait of Hormuz, being closed. All of this makes, and the Iranian regime hanging in there, makes President Trump look very weak as he arrives in Beijing.
So, Greg, to that end, I want to re-up this cover from The Economist from about a month ago. Xi Jinping peering over Trump's shoulder with the headline, "Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake." There it is. Is China just going to wait this out?
Quite possibly. I mean, the Iran war really fits into China's long-term view of the U.S. as a power in decline. And just to pick up on what David said, it keeps engaging in these wars that have not gone well. Afghanistan, Iraq, now Iran. And that China is on the long-term rise, and the West and the U.S. in particular are in decline. So it fits with their worldview. But that said, China does need oil, and China does need to sell its stuff to the world. So it can't completely ignore what's going on at the moment. But in the bigger picture, I think they're pretty happy to see the U.S. struggle in the Middle East.
And speaking of, Colonel Mansour, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu has acknowledged that China may be providing material support to Iran. Does the U.S. have any leverage at this point to pressure China to stop that behavior?
Very little. The war of tariffs has abated. The United States needs China as much as China needs the United States now in an economic sense. There's very little we can do with any instruments of national power to force China to back away from supporting its ally in Tehran. So this war is going to continue, and it's going to continue primarily without outside interference from China or any other international actor.
Laura, Trump brought over a dozen CEOs with him on this trip, including the heads of NVIDIA, Apple, and of course, we talked about Elon Musk. What is the White House hoping to achieve by bringing those execs to China for this meeting?
So again, even as Iran looms large, the president is clearly shifting focus and trying to show that when it comes to the economy, when it comes to making business deals, this is what he is focused on. So bringing these executives, especially the last-minute add-on on NVIDIA's CEO, the president was posting on his way here that he wants to, quote, open China up for these companies, saying that the People's Republic, it will bring the People's Republic, quote, to an even higher level, which is, you know, a stark contrast compared to what he was talking about when it comes to American finances, and that not necessarily being a top priority as he's negotiating around Iran. But the president is looking to potentially open up China to these companies. When it comes to NVIDIA, their AI chips, those chips that are used and are key to the AI boom and are used to train AI models, have not been able to break into the Chinese market. And that's something that NVIDIA CEO is looking to access. That's something that is likely going to be discussed here with these CEOs coming. But I should also note, Ariel, that a former ambassador to China under President Biden, Nicholas Burns, who also served under George W. Bush and under Bill Clinton, and others have provided some warnings when it comes to opening the Chinese market to NVIDIA. Namely, they are warning that doing so would help the Chinese army and military compete technologically with the U.S. military. So that's not necessarily something that others in the United States think is in the best interest of the country to open up the Chinese market to a company like NVIDIA.
That's an interesting point there. And Greg, Trump's tariff war has jostled the world economy, and trade alliances were redrawn, with several countries sort of cozying up to China as a result of this. Analysts say while China invests in AI and military might, parts of its economy are actually unraveling. Who has the upper hand economically here?
Well, we haven't really seen, we've seen sort of a truce is where they wound up. The president came into office a year ago and went up to tariffs of 145%, which were going to be absolutely ruinous. And then China pushed back, limiting the export of rare earth metals and minerals to the U.S. So then they kind of reached a truce last October where they haven't really resolved anything. There's been no structural changes in the main trade relationship. U.S. tariffs now are 20 to 30% on China, a little lower, going the other way. So there's this kind of unresolved truce, and I think they're probably going to look to keep that truce going, but not far from the sort of structural changes that President Trump wanted to achieve. And China has still got issues with its economy. It has perhaps reached out to other parts of the world, but has not solved all of its long-term economic issues either.
Colonel, how is China viewing the overall geopolitical picture here? Does the Iran war, specifically what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz, the stalemate there, and the war in Ukraine color how China may be approaching its long-term claims over Taiwan?
Well, I think it sees the United States being weakened in the Iran war, and it applauds that, actually. It's been said before that China wants the United States to remain embroiled in this unwinnable conflict and to have our military power depleted. Same with Europe vis-a-vis Ukraine. And so that would give China a freer hand to accomplish its goals in dominating the South China Sea and the various islands off its coast, especially Taiwan. So China, I think, feels it's sitting in a pretty good position geopolitically and wants to retain the advantages that gives it.
David, I want to get this in here. You have new reporting on a U.S. intel assessment that contradicts what the Trump administration has been saying as far as the decimation of Iranian capabilities of their arsenal. What are you learning?
Again, this is a very bad headline for the president, but the Washington Post reported last week that 70% of Iran's missile stockpile is intact. I think about a third of it was buried, but they've been able to dig them out. And then the New York Times added reporting that 90% of Iran's launchers right on the Strait of Hormuz, 31 of 33, are now operational again. So this is a huge setback for the president, and it's a pattern of him making sweeping overstatements about what's been achieved, and whether it's trade wars or bombs. And I think it hurts him politically as he begins this